Tonight, we pull back the curtain on a violent turf war you've never seen, the hidden battle inside the Inland Empire, California. From midnight raids in quiet suburban streets to cell phone taps, undercover cops and street hit lists, this is the story of the mass gang arrests in San Bernardino that changed everything. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the full story. This is where crime meets resolution and you're locked in. It was early in the morning when the first detonation went off. Not a bomb, but the buzz of pagers, the quiet shuffle of boots on concrete in neighborhoods where most people slept in until noon. In the city of San Bernardino, the streets had begun to feel like they were inching toward a breaking point. A wave of violence, the kind that creeps slowly then strikes fast, was building. On the surface, this was an unassuming suburb in Riverside, San Bernardino County, part of what locals call the Inland Empire. Schools, strip malls, tree-lined blocks. But beneath that veneer, a network of gangs had wrapped themselves around households, storefronts, rental units. They trafficked drugs, sold guns, exploited turf. One news release put it plainly: during a coordinated gang sweep, officers recovered 16 firearms, 3 ounces of methamphetamine, 1 ounce of cocaine and a large amount of PCP. We'll pause on that for a moment. Why so many weapons? What makes a place like San Bernardino fertile ground for this kind of crackdown? The answer lies in history, geography and neglect. The Inland Empire has long been a transit zone, a place where major highways meet, where cheap housing draws people on the margins. Gangs seized the opportunity. In the months leading up to the operation, reports started coming in: drive-by shootings, turf slayings, even an 8-year-old girl shot in the face while playing outside her home. That jolted something inside the community and forced law enforcement to act. An act they did. On that early morning, dozens of officers from multiple agencies converged. The walls of the system were closing in, but many of those they targeted barely even knew they were targets yet. The investigation was not spontaneous. It had been months in the making. Agents mapped connections: gang crews in San Bernardino County, illegal gambling operations, gun runners, cell phone trees, silent messages passed through corridors of fear. One particular case stood out. A massive sweep in December 2021 targeting a notorious street gang resulted in 180 felony arrests, 92 handguns seized, 19 assault weapons and nearly $300,000 in cash. That number, 180 arrests, sounds massive, but in gang investigations numbers only tell part of the story. What really matters is the infrastructure beneath. The safe houses, the spotters on freeway exits, the stash houses, the code names. Here in the Inland Empire, law enforcement came to realize that they weren't just facing some local street gang, they were facing a regional enterprise that spanned cities, counties, and at times state lines. In the city of San Bernardino and surrounding municipalities like Rialto, Fontana, Colton, Upland, Montclair, and Highland, officers gathered for the operation. These weren't isolated units acting alone. They were joined by dozens of agencies working in lockstep. It wasn't just about arrests. It was about understanding the business model. For example, illegal gambling dens run by gang members that funneled tens of thousands of dollars each week. The presence of high-powered firearms. The fact that murders, attempted murders, were often gang-linked. All this built a mosaic of crime that law enforcement could no longer ignore. We'll now step into the world of one gang crew and follow how their daily routines unfolded. Pick up the phone, move packages, load the car at 3 a.m., stash the weapons, wait for the signal. They didn't think their world was going to collapse that morning, but it did. By dawn, over 80 officers poured into neighborhoods in San Bernardino. They approached alleys, driveways, quiet homes where children were still asleep. According to the release, 30 felony arrests and 12 misdemeanor arrests were ultimately made during this particular sweep. The element of surprise was critical. These crews were prepared to pounce. Tactical units blocked exits. Canvassing began. The arrest teams moved in clusters. Some suspects were cuffed in their beds. Others were surprised as they tried to leave their homes. 2 stolen cars were recovered. Weapons, narcotics. The scene had all the hallmarks of a federal-style takedown, but this was local and it was personal. For the residents, what had been background noise, sirens, gang graffiti, occasional shootings, suddenly became front page. One especially shocking detail: an 8-year-old girl shot in the face while playing on the sidewalk triggered renewed outrage and urgency. Officers encountered barricaded homes, people trying to dart away, crews trying to flush evidence down drains. The raids fractured the illusion of gang immunity, the idea that you could operate in suburbia without consequence. In one home, a trove of firearms was found. In another, drugs in plain view. In yet another, documents referencing what law enforcement would later call green-lighting lists, targets designated for killing. The case had escalated beyond street corners. It was war script territory. As the day wore on, suspects were transported. Evidence catalogued. Arrest records posted. For the gang members, the world changed literally overnight. Their phones went silent. Their usual network of lookouts and messaging systems was disrupted. But this was just the first wave. The second phase, the courtroom, the witness flips, the jail cells, was still ahead. After the initial raids, the community digested what had happened. For some, relief. For many, fear remained. Street crews didn't simply vanish. Some regrouped, some lay low. Territorial instability surged as other crews sensed weakness or opportunity. One of the hardest shifts came inside the homes of those arrested. Families started questioning loyalties. Younger gang associates realized that the era of untouchable was gone. When a massive arrest like this lands, it sends a message, but it also leaves a vacuum. In San Bernardino, law enforcement had removed dozens of key operatives. In the wake of that removal, smaller, more violent incidents sometimes spiked, as the remaining members fought to reassert territory. Meanwhile, the legal wheels turned. Evidence from the raids, phones, GPS logs, weapon trajectories, became prosecutorial ammunition. In many jurisdictions, the most effective way to dismantle a gang isn't just to arrest the foot soldiers, but to crack the leadership, the finances, the relationships. That same December 2021 operation that led to 180 arrests discovered gambling snitch money, weapon caches, and dozens of shell companies. For the public, there was a sense of exposed vulnerability. A city once perceived as quiet suburban suddenly had headlines reading, "Gang sweep nets dozens," and "Firearms seized" on major news sites. Trust in local neighborhoods shifted. There were town hall meetings, police community forums. But the message was clear. Crime inside the Inland Empire had just been elevated to full-scale enforcement priority. At the same time, for the gang members still at large, the tenor changed. They began adapting, moving operations across county lines, altering stash locations, shifting communication to encrypted apps, changing vehicle patterns. The war inside the Inland Empire wasn't over. It had just entered a new phase. When we look at the so-called hidden war in the Inland Empire, we must recognize the battlegrounds are not always highways or open fields, but inside office parks, motel rooms, suburban storage units, homes masquerading as quiet. The gang crews in San Bernardino County didn't just fight each other, they fought economy, geography, demographic change, and law enforcement. One gang with roots in the region is the Ontario Varrio Sur OVS, also known as Ontario Varrio Sunkist, based in nearby Ontario but with reach into parts of the Inland Empire. Their criminal profile includes murder, drive-by shootings, narcotics sales, weapons trafficking. While the major sweep we discussed may not explicitly mention OVS in every article, the ecosystem it sits inside is heavily connected to that sort of network of gangs, cartels, alliances, rivalries. Territory is everything. A street corner is revenue. A rental home can be a stash depot. A local business, laundromat, convenience store, might serve as money laundering node. In San Bernardino's case, law enforcement found the gambling operations ran by gang members served as cash flow mechanisms. And so when the raid hit, it wasn't just arrests. It was a disruption of logistics. It was a moment to expose how the seemingly calm suburb hid multi-million-dollar criminal enterprises operating in plain sight. Drugs in motion, guns in parking lots, money changing hands behind the scenes. This is the hidden war. The video you're watching right now captures the human side. The frightened child who heard bursts of gunfire, the mother who looked out at a stolen car in her driveway, the detective who put in months working nights to nail a target. These are the stakes. These are the players. And make no mistake, the territory claimed here will be fought over again and again. When the handcuffs clicked shut on the streets of San Bernardino, the battle simply changed locations. Courtrooms became the new front line, fluorescent-lit chambers where decades-old gang rivalries were reduced to case numbers, charges, and stacks of evidence sealed in brown envelopes. Prosecutors had been preparing for this moment long before the raids. These were not simple street arrests. They were part of a coordinated strategy designed to break down gang leadership using California's most powerful weapons: conspiracy charges, firearms enhancements, and in some cases, gang enhancement statutes under California Penal Code Section 186.22. In gang investigations, courtroom victories rely heavily on patterns. Not just who shot whom, but who ordered it, who drove the car, who stashed the weapon afterwards, who answered the phone that night. For years, law enforcement agencies in the Inland Empire collected intel. Wiretaps revealing coded conversations. Surveillance connecting suspects to drug houses. Witness statements linking shootings to specific crews. Ballistics showing weapon migration between crimes. Cell site records placing suspects at gang meetings. The prosecution strategy was simple but devastating. Stack enough interconnected evidence to show an organized criminal enterprise, not just isolated crimes. This allowed prosecutors to argue that members weren't just acting individually, they were acting for the benefit of the gang, which dramatically increases sentences. For the defendants, the courtroom felt like another universe. Many went from bold, street-hardened confidence to staring blankly at screens displaying their text messages, GPS histories, and photos from their own social media accounts flashing gang signs at crime scenes. One case involved a young associate caught with a firearm believed to be linked to a previous shooting. In the old days, he might have beaten the case with a good attorney. But this time, his phone messages betrayed him. Talk of work, green lights, and needing pieces painted a damning picture of someone deeply embedded in gang activity. Then came the cooperators, the game changers. When 30, 40, 50 people are arrested at once, somebody always talks. Some were facing 20 to life unless they flipped. Others had children at home, mothers begging them to take deals, girlfriends furious to discover secret double lives. And so prosecutors gained leverage, testimony from former gang members who knew exactly how gambling rooms worked, where the guns were coming from, who held the money, who called the shots. The court cases didn't move quickly. Some stretched months, others would drag on for years thanks to legal challenges, evidence hearings, witness relocations, and delays related to gang classification challenges. Defense attorneys tried everything. Arguing that gang enhancements were misapplied. Claiming certain residents were just hanging with friends. Pushing to suppress evidence from search warrants. Insisting that alleged gang leadership roles were exaggerated. But prosecutors had the weight of seized firearms, drugs, cash, surveillance footage, and corroborated testimony on their side. Meanwhile, several defendants made choices that would change everything. Some took plea deals, shaving years off their sentences in exchange for information. Others refused to cooperate, choosing long sentences over snitching, a code deeply rooted in Southern California gang culture. For families, the courtroom phase was its own kind of trauma. Mothers wept as sons were brought into the courtroom wearing shackles. Sisters begged defense attorneys for updates. Kids asked why their fathers weren't coming home. Some victims' families told the court how the violence shattered their communities, drive-bys near schools, armed standoffs near parks, children unable to play outside. Outside the courtroom, the Inland Empire watched with tension. This wasn't just legal drama, it was the dismantling of power structures that had dominated neighborhoods for generations. For the first time in years, people in Rialto, Colton, and parts of San Bernardino felt the streets quieting. But quiet doesn't mean safe. Whenever gang leadership is taken off the board, power vacuums form, and younger members scramble to claim control. Detectives monitoring jail calls picked up on whispers of retaliation, restructuring, and new alliances forming, even while trials were still underway. It became clear, the courtroom was not the end of the hidden war inside the Inland Empire. It was only another chapter in a conflict constantly evolving, adapting, and resurfacing. The streets were waiting, and they weren't done yet. When the gates of West Valley Detention Center clanged shut behind the newly arrested gang members, many assumed the danger stopped at intake. But anyone who knows the Inland Empire's gang landscape understands something crucial. The streets only tell half the story, the rest is decided behind bars. For decades, county jails in Southern California have been extensions of the street battlefield. And for many of the arrested San Bernardino gang members, stepping into jail wasn't a pause, it was a continuation of the war under new rules, new leadership, and new pressure. Inside West Valley and Adelanto's housing units, the hierarchy was unmistakable. Southern California's jail system has well-documented structures, racial divides, group, divisions, leadership tiers, and expected conduct. New arrivals weren't just processed, they were evaluated. Who they knew, who they ran with, whether they had pending charges that put them in danger, like gang enhancements, witness intimidation allegations, or worst of all, accusations of informing. And because so many gang members had been swept up at once, entire pods shifted overnight. Deputies moved inmates to prevent fights, but tension rose anyway. When a sweep hits the streets, the inside becomes a pressure cooker of information. Who got arrested? Who flipped? Who was caught with weapons? Whose phones were tapped? A single rumor could snap the fragile calm of a housing unit. The first 48 hours inside. The first 2 days after a major gang operation are the most dangerous. Inmates scramble to get news from the outside using phone calls, kites, jail letters, and coded pod chatter. Some tried to hide the details of their charges. Others bragged, hoping to maintain status. But jail politics are unforgiving. If your paperwork hinted you spoke to police, you were checked, verbally then physically. If your charges painted you as unpredictable or reckless, your own crew might distance themselves. And if you were suspected of cooperating with prosecutors, you were either removed by deputies or quietly relocated by other inmates in a way that never made the news. Control, communication, and consequences. Even with the raids underway, the gang hierarchy outside still held influence inside. Some higher-ranking members, those arrested in the sweep, had enough stature to issue instructions across pods. They tapped phones, used code words, and leaned on alliances that stretched from San Bernardino to Riverside to LA County. One critical thing about the Inland Empire jail system is this: power doesn't disappear, it relocates. Messages flowed through every crack in the system. Some instructed members to stay quiet. Others pushed for retaliation against rivals who might have tipped off police. And in several cases, younger members received orders to keep operations running on the streets while their leaders were locked down. Detectives monitoring jail calls began catching fragments. Names whispered, meetings referenced, complaints about rats, demands for commissary money, worries about incoming indictments. Every call was a reminder that the gang structure, though wounded, was very much alive. Deputies on high alert. Correctional officers inside West Valley began noticing the shift. Increased pod tension. More requests for protective custody. More inmates refusing to house with certain groups. They tightened movement schedules, conducted more surprise searches, checked kites more aggressively, and placed high-risk inmates in administrative segregation. One housing unit had to be temporarily locked down after 3 fights in 48 hours, each one sparked by arguments over who got picked up in the raids and who didn't. Even though the public only saw the arrests, the jail felt the aftershocks like tremors rolling through concrete floors. The psychological toll. Many inmates weren't leaders or shot callers. Some were just barely old enough to drink. They entered jail expecting a short court date and maybe bail. Instead, they learned that prosecutors were stacking charges, combining cases, and leveraging gang enhancements with teeth. Reality hit hard. Bail was denied for many. Trials were months away. Family visits were restricted. Allegiances were questioned constantly. Some inmates, who once felt invincible on the streets, now faced the crushing truth of long-term consequences. Anxiety spiked. Withdrawals from drugs shook others. Depression set in. And yet, for others, jail became a proving ground. If they wanted respect, they had to stand strong. If they wanted survival, they had to align correctly. That's the unspoken rule of California's gang pipeline. The most critical shift: leadership collapsing. The central goal of the sweep was to dismantle gang leadership, and inside it was working. Key figures who once commanded crews freely on the outside found themselves isolated, cut off, monitored, and blocked from communicating. Their ability to coordinate crimes, direct retaliation, or manage money pipelines shrank dramatically. Some tried to assert dominance inside, but even that was complicated. Overcrowding, shifting cell assignments, and heavy surveillance made it nearly impossible to maintain the same power. This is how a hidden war weakens, not just through arrests but through isolation of command structure. The streets were quieter not because rival gangs made peace, but because the leaders couldn't effectively pull strings anymore. But the Inland Empire wasn't out of danger. Whenever leadership falls, new contenders step up, often younger, more reckless, more willing to prove themselves through violence. And on the streets, detectives were already tracking signs that another storm was forming. When the Inland Empire woke up after the sweep, the streets felt strange. Quiet, yes, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence you get right before a storm breaks. The arrests had torn chunks out of multiple gangs at once, leaving territory unguarded, money pipelines disrupted, and rank-and-file members confused about who was in charge. And in gang culture, confusion is gasoline. All it takes is one spark. Before the raids, certain blocks in San Bernardino, Rialto, Highland, and parts of Colton were controlled by crews so consistently that locals could almost map out invisible borders without ever looking at a police report. But with dozens of affiliates locked up, those borders faded like chalk in the rain. Now the question everyone whispered, from corner stores to back alleys, was the same. Who runs what now? When leaders fall, the streets reorganize. Every gang structure has its own version of a chain of command. Shot callers, enforcers, foot soldiers, lookouts. When you remove the top layer, as these targeted sweeps did, the system destabilizes instantly. In the weeks after the arrests, younger members began stepping forward, eager to fill the vacuum. Some were barely 18 with reputations built more on impulsiveness than strategy. They weren't dealing with seasoned rivals anymore. They were clashing with other young members trying to ascend at the same time. Detectives saw the pattern coming. Power vacuums don't stay empty. And in San Bernardino, they rarely refill quietly. Retaliation without direction. Historically, gang retaliation is strategic. Send a message, protect turf, respond to a challenge. But the post-sweep environment was chaotic. With leaders locked away and communication restricted, splinter crews made decisions on their own, often without approval or awareness of bigger consequences. Rivals who had been dormant suddenly reappeared, seeking to reclaim old blocks. Taggings were crossed out within hours. Street corners once dominated by a single crew now had 3 different sets staking their claim. It wasn't open war, not yet, but it was close. The Inland Empire felt it. Residents noticed patrol cars lingering longer. Helicopters circling more frequently. Detectives parking in unmarked vehicles for hours watching. The tension was thick enough to taste. The drug trade shifts into new hands. The sweeps didn't end drug trafficking. They changed who controlled it. Before the raids, distribution lines for methamphetamine, fentanyl pills, and cocaine were relatively stable. But as mid-level dealers were arrested or forced into hiding, new contenders stepped in. Street-level prices even fluctuated, something narcotics officers track closely, since price changes often signal a shakeup in the supply chain. Informants reported that in parts of the San Bernardino metro area, dealers they'd known for years were suddenly gone, replaced by younger, more unpredictable sellers who didn't know the old rules and didn't care to learn them. And with new sellers came new disputes. Some tried to boost profit by cutting product more aggressively. Others undercut rivals on price. Some moved into blocks that had been hands-off for years. When the economy of crime reshuffles, violence usually follows. Police strategy: pressure the streets while courts handle the leaders. Law enforcement expected the turbulence. After all, this wasn't their first sweep and it certainly wouldn't be their last. Detectives from gang units in San Bernardino, Rialto, and Fontana began proactive patrols, rolling through hotspots known for retaliatory shootings. They increased foot patrols in neighborhoods where youth recruitment was likely. They set up crime suppression operations around liquor stores and apartment complexes used as meeting points. They doubled back on areas tied to earlier shootings, anticipating retaliation attempts. The strategy wasn't just to stop violence, it was to prevent the rise of new leadership before it solidified. Communities caught in the middle. Residents felt the shift long before reporters noticed. Mothers didn't let their kids play outside after dark anymore. Store owners closed earlier. Neighborhood associations held emergency meetings on Zoom. Teachers noticed certain students missing more days as their families dealt with court dates, relocations, or safety fears. And throughout this, rumors exploded. Someone got greenlit. A crew from another city is sliding in. Police are watching this block heavy. Some rumors were false. Some were exaggerated. But in a neighborhood already scarred by years of violence, fear travels faster than facts. The social media factor. One of the most dangerous developments came from where you might least expect: Instagram and Snapchat. Younger, newly empowered members used social media to flex influence, flashing cash, showing weapons, hinting at retaliation, and mocking rivals who had been arrested. Videos appeared of crews claiming abandoned territory. Posts suggested alliances shifting in real time. Certain young members even made thinly veiled threats at unidentified snitches, escalating tension both inside and outside the jail. Detectives saw every bit of it, because these young members didn't understand the 2 rules seasoned leaders lived by. Real power doesn't post. Screenshots last forever. By the time the courts called defendants back for hearings, prosecutors had entire folders of online posts submitted as evidence. The calm before the next storm. The Inland Empire in this moment wasn't stable, it was suspended. The major players were behind bars, but their replacements were negotiating control through intimidation, reckless moves, and desperate attempts to claim territory before someone else did. This wasn't peace. This was a slow build. A tightening coil. A system rearranging itself before it snaps again. Because everyone, police, residents, even the gangs themselves, understood the truth. San Bernardino's hidden war wasn't over. It was only resetting. When most people imagine a gang being dismantled, they picture a clean ending: leaders arrested, members scattered, streets quiet. But anyone familiar with California's gang landscape knows the truth is much more complicated. Gangs don't disappear after a sweep. They regrow, reshape, and restructure themselves like a living organism adapting to survive. And in the Inland Empire, this evolution happens fast. After the San Bernardino raids, multiple crews began rebuilding the web that connected their money, drugs, weapons, and manpower. But the rebuilt version looked nothing like the old one. A criminal enterprise without its brain. The major operation had taken out vital pieces: shot callers, major dealers, enforcers. Removing these isn't like pulling random bricks out of a wall, it's like ripping out the central nervous system. The body twitches, but it doesn't function the same way. The surviving members faced a brutal reality. They needed a new structure. They needed people to take over roles. And they needed to rebuild without drawing the same attention that got them raided in the first place. This is where gang evolution begins. The 5 roles every gang rushes to replace. In the weeks after the sweep, detectives observed something they'd predicted: members scrambling to fill 5 core gaps. The connector, the person who links the gang to suppliers, especially those tied to cartel pipelines stretching into Mexico. The banker, the person who manages cash flow, controls gambling rooms, and cleans dirty money through tax-registered businesses. The enforcer, someone willing to apply violence to maintain discipline or secure territory. The messenger, the person responsible for moving orders from inmates to street-level members without detection. The foot soldiers, young, hungry members ready to move drugs, run lookouts, and carry out orders. After the raids, each of these positions was suddenly empty or unstable. The result? Chaos, disorganization, and dozens of people vying for influence at the same time. New leaders, more reckless, less experienced. Unlike the older shot callers who rose through decades of street politics, the new leaders, emerging, were mostly in their early 20s. They didn't know the old codes. They didn't care about strategy. They wanted fast money, instant clout, and respect through intimidation, not structure. They made mistakes, making deals with untested suppliers, implementing sloppy communication methods, posting coded threats online, and moving territory lines without approval, trusting people who couldn't be trusted. Detectives would later say these new leaders caused more violence in 6 weeks than the older generation caused in 6 months, not because they were more dangerous but because they were reckless. How information became the new currency. In the aftermath of major sweeps, information becomes the most valuable commodity. Gangs started acting like intelligence networks. Who got arrested? Who snitched? Who was under surveillance? Which houses were hit? Which cars were seized? Which rivals were still active? Kites from jails were passed like currency. Streets hummed with whispers. Even people with no gang affiliation knew new rules of the block, passed down like ghost stories. In this environment, even false information could spark violence. A rumor about cooperation. A claim about who tipped off police. A lie about who crossed into whose territory. And in many cases, those lies turned deadly. The cartel factor. Quiet, powerful, always watching. One factor the public rarely hears about, but law enforcement studies closely, is cartel influence. Not open control, but supply chain control. Some Inland Empire gangs rely heavily on Mexican suppliers for meth, pills, and firearms. When a sweep disrupts sales, suppliers get impatient. In the months after the San Bernardino sweep, contacts in Mexico began applying pressure. Who's running things now? When will sales resume? What happened to our people inside? Gangs scrambled to respond. Losing cartel trust is dangerous. Rebuilding it is even harder. Some crews attempted to prove themselves by boosting distribution. Others turned to violent posturing, thinking fear would re-establish their authority. But all it did was draw more police attention. Shifting territories, shifting alliances. When the web is torn apart, alliances become flexible. Crews that hated each other months earlier suddenly shared loaders, stash houses, or even vehicles. 4 gangs in the Inland Empire, survival outweighed rivalry. In Rialto, one set quietly partnered with a rival crew to keep drug routes open. In Highland, 2 smaller groups pooled money to buy weapons from the same supplier. In central San Bernardino, neutral members became middlemen between rivals who didn't trust each other enough to communicate directly. The map of influence was redrawn daily. Detectives watching the rebuild in real time. Law enforcement knew gangs were rebuilding, and they watched closely. Undercover officers reported shifts in meeting spots. New CIs emerged, younger, scared members who wanted out. Gang unit patrols documented who lingered at certain blocks and who had gone missing. Social media surveillance flagged dozens of new accounts linked to gang activities. One detective put it simply. After a major sweep, gangs rebuild faster than the public thinks, but sloppier than they realize. And sloppy is exactly what police wait for. A sloppy street deal. A sloppy gun purchase. A sloppy social media boast. A sloppy handoff watched by the wrong eyes. Every mistake created evidence. Every evidence created leverage. And leverage is how cases grow. The Inland Empire was changing, again. The San Bernardino raids didn't eliminate gangs. They weakened them. They confused them. They fractured them. But now, as they rebuilt the web, something darker was forming. A system where younger, more impulsive members held power they weren't mentally ready for. Those are the members who start wars without thinking. Those are the members who pull triggers without permission. Those are the members who get entire neighborhoods caught in the crossfire. And those are the members who would soon force law enforcement to escalate this hidden war into something even bigger. For weeks, the Inland Empire had been operating like a shaken soda bottle. Pressure building, tension rising, everyone waiting for the explosion. Detectives knew it. Residents felt it. Even the younger gang members stepping into power sensed something was coming. The question wasn't if something would happen. It was what would finally pull the trigger on the next wave of violence. And then it happened. It started with a single incident. One moment that would tip the fragile balance and throw the streets into chaos again. An event so small from the outside, but so loaded with implications inside gang politics that it ricocheted across neighborhoods like wildfire. A night in Highland, the spark no one saw coming. It was close to midnight on a warm Inland Empire night, the kind where people linger outside because the heat refuses to die. A small group of younger members gathered near an apartment complex in Highland, a place already known for turf disputes long before the raids. They weren't planning anything major. At least not at first. But among this group was a newcomer trying to prove himself. A kid barely out of high school, eager to show he deserved a position in the power vacuum created by the arrests. He'd been bragging, flashing money he shouldn't have had, talking about moves he never made. And someone from a rival set heard his mouth running. Words were exchanged. Territory was mentioned. Respect was challenged. And then arrogance did what no organized plan could. It lit a fuse. The young member pulled a gun he wasn't supposed to have. A rival stepped forward when he should have walked away. And a single flash, one gunshot, cut the night open. Nobody died, but the bullet struck a car belonging to a family that had nothing to do with gang activity. Within minutes, the complex erupted. People scrambled. Cars peeled out. Neighbors ducked indoors. The kid who fired the shot ran terrified, realizing too late what he'd done. But the damage wasn't the bullet. It was the message the bullet sent. Why this one shot changed everything. In the world of gang structure, violence isn't random, it's regulated by unwritten rules. Even rivals usually follow patterns. Retaliation only when ordered, timing chosen for impact, location selected to send a message. But this shooting? This wasn't strategic. It wasn't ordered. It wasn't sanctioned by anyone with authority. It was an unauthorized act of violence, and that is one of the biggest violations in California gang culture. And because it was unauthorized, two consequences hit instantly. Older members inside the jail saw it as a disrespectful move. A younger member starting a war without clearance makes the entire set look weak or out of control. Rivals interpreted it as a deliberate attack. Even if it wasn't planned, the streets don't care about intention, only outcome. That single bullet didn't hit a rival, but it hit the hierarchy. And breaking hierarchy is how full gang wars begin. Retaliation begins, faster than anyone expected. Within hours, phones inside West Valley lit up. Jail calls spiked. Kites moved quickly. Older members demanded answers. Who fired the shot? Was he ordered? Why was he even armed? What is the retaliation plan? Meanwhile, rivals began circling blocks in Rialto and San Bernardino, assuming the shooting was intentional. Social media posts popped up with cryptic warnings. Emojis, subliminal messages, half-phrases implying payback. Police patrols noticed immediate changes. Cars with tinted windows slowly rolling through areas where they hadn't been seen in weeks. Younger members gathering in clusters near liquor stores. Face coverings pulled tight. Weapons appearing that had been hidden since the raids. The streets were vibrating. The young shooter, suddenly a marked man. The member who fired the shot wasn't hailed as a hero. He wasn't respected. He wasn't feared. He was condemned. Older members blamed him for jeopardizing stability during the gang's vulnerable rebuilding phase. Rivals blamed him for an unprovoked attack. Law enforcement targeted the entire area for increased surveillance because of his mistake. And within his own set, his life expectancy dropped dramatically. A reckless act in a power vacuum isn't bravery, it's suicide. He tried hiding with friends. He changed his phone. He lied about what happened. But rumors travel faster than truths in gang culture, and within 2 days both police and rivals knew his name. Law enforcement reaction: a rapid shift to crisis mode. Detectives monitoring gang activity immediately flagged the shooting as a potential domino event. They'd seen it before, in Compton, in South LA, in Fresno, in Sacramento. One impulsive shooting can unravel months of stabilization efforts. The gang suppression unit activated additional patrol deployments. Undercover officers were positioned near likely retaliation spots. Emergency briefings were held with command staff. Electronic monitoring was expanded on parolees and probationers. High-crime areas were flooded with marked units to prevent a bloodbath. But here's the truth. Police can respond to violence. They can't stop the psychology behind it. This wasn't about territory anymore. This wasn't about money. This was about respect, order, and face. And nothing in gang culture inflames violence faster than wounded ego. The streets react. Fear, rumor, tension. By the next morning, the incident spread across the Inland Empire like wildfire. Residents who had survived decades of gang activity recognized the signs. This wasn't random. This was the start of something larger. Cars drove faster. Families stayed indoors. Corner stores closed early. People avoided certain blocks. The air felt thick, electric, dangerous. And in a chilling way, the quiet returned. The same eerie, suffocating quiet that had preceded the first wave of violence before the raids. This was the trigger point. The moment the hidden war reawakened. And the Inland Empire braced for what came next. Because once blood hits the ground, even metaphorically, retaliation follows. And retaliation is where the real war begins. In the end, the story of San Bernardino's hidden war isn't about one raid, one arrest, or one mistake. It's about a cycle built on fear, hunger, revenge, survival, and silence. A cycle that reshapes itself every time the system tries to break it. Law enforcement removed guns, money, fugitives, and leaders. But the streets shifted, adapted, and rebuilt. And the next generation stepped into roles they weren't ready for. This is the reality of the Inland Empire. A place where quiet neighborhoods can become battlegrounds overnight. A place where one gunshot at midnight can rewrite the entire landscape of gang politics. A place where families live between hope and danger every single day. And while this chapter ends here, the war doesn't. Not in the jails. Not in the courts. Not on the streets. The names change. The alliances shift. The tactics evolve. But the tension remains, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the next spark, the next mistake, the next move that pushes the cycle forward again. If you found this story eye-opening, haunting, or simply important to understand, then stick with us, because we're not done pulling back the curtain on the stories most people never hear. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive into the world behind the headlines. This has been California's Hidden War inside the Inland Empire. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe, and stay curious.